Fighting game content sucks. Games like Dragon Ball, games like Marvel vs. Capcom back at the 360 era, and even Xrd and now Strive. They've always been part of my life. I've been playing fighting games for 5 years now. But the story and content of these games have always been seen in a very negative sense. Designing most games to be focused on the gameplay rather than expanding the content in the base game, with a focus on animations and mechanics of the like that are so intuitive and thought out that it makes other competitive games in this game look lacking in comparison in a lot of areas. But if you're looking at someone getting into the genre, how do you keep them in or give them an experience that's worthy of their time, more than just the first month or the first couple of days or so, or hours? And no, I'm not really going to talk about the free fighting game war that's most likely been raging the YouTube and internet space for a little bit, but I might talk about a little bit of it later. Fighting games have been stuck at the back of the evolution chain when it comes to making something new. The games get more pretty, but is that all that makes a good and interesting game nowadays? I don't think so. The fighting game has been stuck in an era where most of its content is relied on the arcade mode of thinking, from the arcade machines from the early 90s and 2000s, where it's mainly focused on beating up an enemy and going to the next. And because of this, a lot of fighting games generally feel relatively the same narratively, with most of the time trying to do something different usually turns to a fighting game with random strangers that have no relevance to anything other than filling up the time. Now I know what you're thinking. What the heck are you talking about? They're all very different, with a lot of them being crazier than others. Alright, then humor me. Have you ever heard of this fighting game that story is about this crazy tournament filled with fighters of different backgrounds that ends with someone fighting a big bad at the end? You're probably thinking about, Mortal Kombat. Well boy, I got news for you. But seriously, this isn't really a new concept, as fighting games have been copying each other from the very beginning. From mechanics, to stories, to, pretty much everything, like Tekken and Virtua Fighter. No idea what Virtua Fighter is, by the way, I just know my grandpa likes it, so that's something. There are games in the genre that do try to do things differently, like Guilty Gear, making a graphic novel as its story mode, as well as having a story in its arcade mode. Although this was more of a change because they did do the exact same tournament style. I think it was actually its first game that this happened. But what can be done to give a player more content without them having to spend $60 again on top of what they've already paid for? Sure, there are some extra modes like fighting a boss, or having a secret boss, or cool little trinkets like a figure mode or something that you could add to it. There is an option to bring in game modes that trend different genres, like the story mode of Granblue. The addition of a semi-beat-em-up brought a lot of diversity to the game, though it was a small part of the core game, being online against another player. In the past, Street Fighter has brought in game modes like breaking barrels and parrying basketballs, but even content like that, being a small part, were eventually cut out. Could it be due to budget? Or could it be because of the focus of what Street Fighter and most fighting games of the current age are focusing on, being tournaments and the esports scene? Mortal Kombat, even doing the reverse of this, would continue to bring in more modes like the Crypts from past games that would make a return in Mortal Kombat 11, and tower modes to fight bosses and unlock skins and cool little items. These elements being added to these games would definitely bring a lot more to be done in the game rather than just playing the online mode for most of the time and watching the story mode. Or, if your most fighting game is actually playing it. And people seem to have the same exact thought. Not exactly something you do for fun, per se, but it does have its own charm, and you do get something out of it, being items, skins, trinkets to put onto your character. There is a company, however, that could change very well how this and much of the content in fighting games are viewed and presented. It's a bit of a bombshell to a lot of the FGC, and for good reason. I mean, the genres that they have touched so far, being shooters, card games, and whatever the heck League of Legends is, have been a really big success. They're really good at being accessible, especially with their games being free, in the case of their first-party creations anyway, as well as having a lot of charm to their games and a really cool art style that I actually really like. Not that long ago, I made a video on Arcane where I talk a little bit about Riot, their company, and how crazy they are, and how good they are and what they do. You should check it out. But here's the thing. Currently, there's a problem with fighting games and the concept of being free to me. And it's not really about, being pay to win, potentially, or the possible battle passes that may come from it, but more so how the industry, especially in Japan, would adapt to this, or even consider it. For example, my favorite fighting game series of all time, and I mean, just look at my dead channel for a couple of seconds and you could probably tell what it is. Guilty Gear has a really big problem with this. Creating skins and the like for games in most, if not all, of the ArcSys catalog would probably take the same amount of time as making a new character, as these games are made frame by frame from 3D models, disproportionate, ripped asunder. The basic physics of the game is so complicated as compared to Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter that designing items and skins would probably take a long time, honestly. And seeing how skins pretty much saved Street Fighter V, it's safe to say it would kill ArcSys and the model of sprite-based fighting games. And until this is figured out, it's pretty much bye-bye to that genre. Fighting games are in a very interesting time right now. Games that would probably not get a lot of limelight in a couple of years ago are the face of the industry right now. It's safe to say that the next few years will be very interesting. But as long as I don't have to spend $60 for a bikini skin, I'm fine. Actually.